Joe Pardavila. Welcome to the Forbes Books Podcast. And for years, the world of business has been described as cutthroat, dog-eat-dog, and ruthless. But oh, how times have changed. Now more businesses are centered around building a kinder, more sustainable world. Joining me today is an entrepreneur, speaker, writer, and founder of several companies, including Canadian-based communication and crowdsourcing company M&C. Her name is Giovanna Mingarelli, and she is at the forefront of this kindness revolution. Giovanna, welcome to the podcast.
Joe, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome. So in March of 2020, Giovanna, you said that if you had won $1 million contract, you would write a book about how you succeeded and share with women around the world so they could too. Is that sort of the genesis for Operation Good Fortune?
That's a really great way of kicking this off. So Operation Good Fortune actually started in April of 2009. I was sitting at my desk job, working a 9-to-5 job for the Canadian government and thinking, how can I build the life of my dreams and do the stuff that I love and help a lot of people, but do it on a really big scale and build a meaningful life, which included making enough money to support myself, my family, my friends, do cool stuff, travel around the world, etc. I was thinking, what would be a good goal, right? Like, what is a dollar sign that would help me see that I was successful, that I had been successful? And at the time, $1 million seemed like a huge number, right? Like, how does someone go from working a 9-to-5 desk job to making $1 million, right? And I didn't come from a business family necessarily. Like, I didn't study business in school. I had actually worked in politics. And so I was really going to have to teach myself a lot there. And so Operation Good Fortune was essentially a plan that I laid out for myself back in April 2009 for how I would start a business, which has become 4 businesses, as well as chairing an international nonprofit organization and basically building multiple businesses for good, and with a goal of, ultimately at some point in that process, generating $1 million in revenue. And so that is where it started. And it's taken about 10 years. And I always thought I would write a book once I got there. And here we are. Wow.
What a story. And so 2009, 2022, my math is correct. You're dealing at almost 15 years there. Talk to me about that journey, because you essentially went from a 9-to-5er to becoming a serial entrepreneur at the flick of a switch. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't, but that's what it almost feels like in that short period of time.
Absolutely. And has it actually been 15 years? That's crazy. So, so many people think about this concept of like the overnight success. And one of my good friends and advisors and colleagues, Christine Puccio, she's the vice president of F5 for go-to-market, which is a big technology company in the Bay Area. She said, an overnight success takes 15 years. and I loved it when she said that. And I've just realized that I believe that too, because many of us are fed this story, right? Like this kind of Silicon Valley story that, you have like the young 20-something that goes off and like builds some huge company in like a hot 5 seconds. And it just doesn't work like that. And in fact, none of the big tech companies were actually built as overnight successes. They all took like
years,
many years, right? Like there is no overnight success. And that I have a whole chapter in Operation Good Fortune, in fact, about expectations and having reasonable expectations about going into business, because that was one of the things that was the most excruciating to me as, a very kind of driven entrepreneur with like, big expectations. I had previously, before going into business, worked in politics. I had gotten involved in politics when I was 15 as a co-op student while still in high school. By the age of 20, I was working in the Prime Minister's office for former Prime Minister Paul Martin in the press office. At 22, I left politics. So I did a full cycle in politics. And then after that, started working in the startup sector in New York, in Birmingham, in England. And then came back to Canada in 2010 and then eventually started my first company. So I had experienced what it's like to be very successful. And I kind of knew how to do that, right? Like you work hard, you make lots of friends, but you don't push too hard. You just go with the flow and, be intelligent about it and be smart about it. And eventually like you'll be successful. And with business, it was just like those still all apply, but there's so many additional parameters to it. And also when you're dealing with multiple different like types of personalities and different kinds of clients and different kinds of businesses, and especially in technology, etc. Like there's so many different unseen circumstances, and there's stuff that's completely outside of your control, right? There's market conditions. There are natural disasters,
sure. Pandemics,
right?
Inflation.
There's
pandemic,
a lot,
a lot of things. Yeah.
And so you have to take that all into account. And so having reasonable expectations was and is one of the most important things that I feel needs to be conveyed. And I think for people to understand if they're thinking of going into business.
I'd love to dig into this expectation piece of your book because I feel like especially in tech, unless you've created a $1 billion idea, you're a failure. And it's
right?
It's so crazy that, we've built, and one of the things I like to joke, Giovanna, when I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs is when I was younger, I'm a Gen Xer. So when I was younger, the term entrepreneur was almost a joke. Like when someone told someone you were an entrepreneur, that means, oh, what do you mean you're unemployed? So, but we have, because of the Steve Jobs of the world and the Jeff Bezos, we've canonized entrepreneurs and founders of companies. They have become sort of the gold standard of what a success is. How do we stop that? Is there a way to? Because I feel like unless you're worth $1 billion, you're a failure. I don't think it's a great way to live.
No, and I agree. And in fact, my book is really targeting, in particular, 18 to 25-year-old women, because I was 26 when I started my first business, and there were no books for me. Like as a young woman, there were some fantastic books that I read. Sheryl Sandberg, Lean In. Mm-hmm. There was Arianna Huffington's, Thrive. There was, of course, Oprah, amazing role model. But for me, the issue was how to go from zero to I have a business was completely outside of my wheelhouse. As a young woman, I didn't have really that many people to look to or books to read. One great book that I was super inspired by was Jim Rogers, so George Soros' business partner. He wrote Investment Biker about how he traveled around the world investing in cool companies on his motorcycle. And I thought, wow, I would like to be like that when I'm like a successful entrepreneur. But right, getting from where I was at that time, like sitting behind my desk at my desk job, to being like Jim Rogers was so completely foreign, right? Like there are many assumptions that you already have the money to invest, right? That you understand how to invest, you know what a good company looks like, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like really, really at the beginning. So the point is that I read many, many books, many of Warren Buffett's books and books about him and his investment theses. I read many books about how to build companies, but none of them were, specifically for a young woman. And so that my whole point is simply, I am writing this book for the person that I was when I was going off into business, basically blind, with an idea of what I wanted to do, which was to transform the world through kindness and to support basically the mandate of ESG, so environment, social governance, within companies, and to make a living doing that. And to do that through technologically enabled platforms, in particular using crowdsourcing, which at the time, back in 2009, 2010, wasn't really a thing, right? Like it was so early. I was interviewed by Harvard Business School for being one of the first people to use crowdsourcing for social good in 2011, anywhere. Yeah, all this to say is I think that there is a need to be realistic about how to go off and build a business. And I think in particular for young women, There's especially a need because we need more women going into business in general, and then women writing books to help those women succeed as well.
Mm-hmm. It's very much the chicken and the egg thing, right, Giovanna? Because it's almost like what the NFL is experiencing now with the lack of black head coaches. Unless there are more black assistant coaches, they won't be black head coaches. And if it's and same with what you're discussing in the business sector, if there are not more young female executives or young female entrepreneurs, there won't be female founders and CEOs. It's a very tricky dynamic there, isn't there?
Absolutely.
And I'm curious. I forgot. This is kind of a silly question. Is entrepreneurship different in Canada as opposed to the States? It's probably not, but I'm because you're such a, you use the word kind. You're such a kinder, gentler people as on the surface from what we gather down here as your neighbors to the South. But is it different, or is it entrepreneurship? Do you feel like it's pretty similar between the U.S. and Canada?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, in general, entrepreneurship between Canada and the U.S. is pretty similar. But there are a few contrasts that I think would stand out. One, Canadians are so much more, I think, humble and don't like to talk about themselves or talk themselves up as much, which can be a challenge because in business, your whole point is to sell,
right,
and to promote yourself, right? So for Canadians, that can be sometimes, at odds. Kindness is huge. Canada is consistently in the top 3 kindest countries in the world. And we compete with Finland and Denmark, every year for who is going to be the kindest.
I love that there's a kindness competition in the world. The U.S. will never be involved in that competition, but I digress.
I don't know where they are in that competition, but I
we ain't winning it, Giovanna. I could tell you that.
Yeah, but Canada did. I'm actually very delighted to share that Canada celebrated our first National Kindness Week ever in February of this year. That was legislation that was passed in June of last year, and I supported it. And we celebrated with a multi-partisan press conference announcing the National Kindness Week initiative. And one of my companies, MC2, has actually been powering the technology and donating the technology to support a global kindness campaign called Unite Kindness, which falls under the banner of Global Dignity, which is a non-religious, non-political nonprofit, for which I'm the board chair globally and the Canadian chair. And our goal is basically to bring kindness to schools and workplaces to empower young people and people in general to be kinder to themselves and others during COVID-19. And so since May of 2020, when we launched this campaign, we've aggregated over 2.6 million acts of kindness so far. Wow. Across 40 different campaigns in North America. So we're very excited about that. And that started in Canada as well.
Last year, you spoke at a Young Leaders Forum, and you talked about the key leadership qualities of love, care, responsibility, tolerance, and dignity. And this goes to what we're talking about here. But I wanted to key in on the word love. I hate to date myself, but if the word love came up in the office, 10 years ago, someone would probably call HR. But I feel like a lot of companies are now leaning into to that word. Tell me about that shift, and why you think that shift is important.
Right. That's a really good question. So in the context with which I use the word love, I am sharing it as a more holistic, compassionate form of love, right? So a non-romantic love, a love that is expressed through kindness. When I'm saying love in this particular case, it's saying I value you, right? And I see your importance and I want you to be happy, right? And that's the basis of it. And that love can be extended to any person, any living being. It's the basis of dignity. Love, I believe, is the social fabric that keeps us all together, right? Because we care about each other. And when we love each other and we're kind to each other and to ourselves, that ultimately leads to happiness. And so that's what I mean by love. Of course, love encompasses romance and all that stuff, but that's really not the context here, or the context with which I was sharing it during the Young Leaders Forum last fall.
Yeah. Because I do see a lot of leaders and folks that are in sort of the people space, the HR space, talking about the word love. And it's just funny that, it's obvious that it's not in the romantic fashion, but it's still just an odd word to hear in the world of business. I don't know. It could be like a generational thing, but it is still weird. One thing that I find sticky with businesses, and let me know if you agree with this. A lot of businesses, companies, organizations love to use the phrase or word, "We're a family. We're a family business.
Right.
We're,"
Right.
my problem with that is you don't fire family. In a
Right.
business, you tend to fire people. It happens, whether it's a
Yeah.
culture fit, whether it's a skill fit, it happens. You don't fire
Mhm.
family. So, in terms of the culture of an organization, building kindness and love and responsibility and tolerance in a company, how do you toe that line where you want to have this incredible culture build, but at the same time, at the end of the day, it's a business and people sometimes have to be fired?
I mean, that's a super, super important question and is becoming more and more relevant, right? Because I think there is this undertone, especially since COVID-19, like there's this like diversity, equity, and inclusion undertone. People want to have more inclusion in the workplace. People want to see more kindness, caring, love, right, expressed in respectable ways in the workplace. People want to have more equity, gender equity, equity for people with disabilities, etc. People want to feel more inclusive and included, which includes this notion of family. Now, the issue with using the language family, right, is if you're a nonprofit or a charity, it's probably okay. In fact, within Global Dignity, which is a nonprofit that I chair internationally, like that's a word that we use is we're a family, right? We're the Global Dignity family. Everyone is a volunteer, right? Like everyone is a volunteer, and so your motivation is you're showing up and you're organizing events, right, to support K-12 kids. Which often involves like young children, right, who understand these concepts of like family means I love my brother, sister, right? So it's fine, and it's not really a confusing concept when it involves the workplace. I actually do think we have to be careful because it is a workplace. And people do have to meet certain standards. I think that having inclusion and kindness and caring and love for one another is important, of course. But I think having reasonable expectations about what that means and maintaining professional and respectful boundaries is also really important, because you have to have healthy relationships between managers, employees, managers, directors, etc. Those concepts do exist, right? Like when you're at a nonprofit and everyone's volunteering and it's all fantastic and we're organizing together, like it's much more loose. When you're in a workplace, it's not quite so. And people can get confused.
Yeah.
Right? If you're in a workplace and you have too much freedom to that effect. So I think that for every workplace, it'll be different, and that's great. And it's, I think, up to the leadership of the company to set policies and standards for what's acceptable, to communicate those effectively, so that people are clear about, what's expected of them, what's expected of leadership, how can there be, equitable and inclusive leadership involving everyone in the company, but everyone understands their roles, and that can feel like a family. But at the end of the day, it's a workplace.
Yeah. And it's one thing a lot of people don't think about when they use the word family is the word family can be triggering for folks. Not everyone, not everyone, was born with a giant house with a white picket fence and 2.5 kids and a puppy and a cat. So it's almost like not even like it almost seems like it's not even worth to go there, because the family's not like that for everyone.
No, and like some people actually have really traumatic family experiences, right? And so for them, they go to work and they actually want to get away, right? That's right. The harsh and sad reality of some people's, and actually their workplace can be their sanctuary and the place where they actually feel more included than they do at home. So in those cases, right, like it's actually really a gift to be in a workplace where you feel like your colleagues are your family, And I actually know quite a few people who feel that and who believe that, and their whole lives are their work. And so that's also important, right? But also I think people just have to be really mindful of how family is used, especially when it's being used from like in an official capacity, right? I think that really, really has to be taken into consideration, probably not used lightly on a kind of company-wide scale, unless it's like really thought through and communicated properly as to what that means.
Cool. And let's talk about one of the 20 companies you're involved with here. One of them is M&C Consulting, and we kind of made reference to it earlier, but you're rooted in a crowd consulting model.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Great question. So M&C was my first company. So in 2009, when I sat around and was like, what am I going to do? Basically I thought, okay, well, I'm good at communications. I know this. So I'm going to start a communications company, right? And so basically M&C Consulting emerged. Also at the time, I loved crowdsourcing. I had loved working with people in politics. I have loved social networking, working in the startup sectors in New York and in Birmingham, England. I wanted to bring people together around shared activities online. Crowdsourcing was an emerging way of doing that. And so I thought, I'm going to bring together communications and crowdsourcing and start a company to help other companies have a good impact on the world. And so M&C Consulting emerged. We are a digital communications and marketing firm based in Ottawa with a presence in Seattle and soon also Karachi, Pakistan. Basically, we offer 4 services: executive branding. So we help brand executives to showcase their professional accomplishments with a particular focus on their social accomplishments. We help brand companies to showcase their ESG commitments, right? So basically their environmental, social governance commitments, to quantify and qualify their impact and showcase that to stakeholders, because increasingly more and more people, in particular millennials, are demanding greater transparency and accountability from companies around those issues. Millennials are actually 86% more likely to purchase from a company that is publicly showcasing their ESG commitments than they would from a company not doing so. So it's actually in the financial interest of companies to do this. And then we also offer software as a service impact technology, which is the basis of my other companies. So we integrate into our clients' companies products such as software as a service, AI-powered chatbots that help make discoverable positive actions and campaigns in the workplace, anywhere from environmental cleanups to gender-related campaigns. And then finally, we run campaigns for these clients. For example, we worked with the Office of the Secretary General's office, Antonio Guterres' office, last summer on a Global Women Heads of State campaign led by the President of Estonia's office and the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, along with our partner, The Art of the Possible Consulting. And we basically developed a social media campaign, video-based campaign, where women heads of state around the world challenged one another to share what they would do for women and girls' health post-COVID on social media. And so that's one example of the kind of campaign that we run. And essentially, M&C integrates all of the different companies that I have been working on over the last decade and showcases and presents those technologies to our clients, who include Fortune 500 companies, governments, and nonprofits and NGOs.
And it sounds like there are no borders around Giovanna Mingarelli. You are international. Why is that important to you?
So I have worked, I come from a very large family. So I have 6 brothers and sisters. We're Italian, Canadian. I've always had this very international scope. And even though I spent my formative years growing up in this small French-Canadian town called Rockland, I always knew I wanted to do big things, and I wanted to travel all around the world and meet lots of really interesting people. And one of the first professional communities that I became involved in when I started M&C Consulting was the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers community. The global shapers are young leaders between the ages of 20 and 29 who use their entrepreneurialism to serve society. And I was invited in 2011 as part of the first cohort of global shapers to participate in the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland. What's funny about this is at the time, I didn't even really know what that was. I knew that the prime minister that I worked for used to go to that, but I had never really considered going there myself. And so I went there, and ever since I've participated pretty regularly in the World Economic Forum's meeting in Davos, but also the World Economic Forum's annual meeting of the new champions in China. I was just recently last week in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, participating in the Mongolia Economic Forum.
Oh, I was there too. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, were you really? I was like, there were not that many people from North America there. So I'm sorry we missed each other. But all of this to say is from basically like the first couple of years, I think through a combination of interest and fortune, I was invited to participate in these really amazing international events, and my network has just reflected that. And I really value my my international partners and collaborators, business associates and friends, because I believe to change the world and to bring greater diversity, inclusion, impact, and kindness to the world, there are no borders. There cannot be borders. It is a borderless concept. And to have a big impact, you have to know a lot of people in a lot of places. And so that's really how I see it. And it's fun.
And as an Italian Canadian living in a French Canadian town, how does one like that fall in love with meditation and Buddhism? And now we're recording this podcast while you're sitting in Nepal visiting holy sites. How did that happen for you?
Oh, that's a great question. So in 2010, when I had just started M&C Consulting, I'd come back from Birmingham, England, again, where I had been working at a television startup there. And while there, I had started studying about the power of the mind. And I was really, really wanting to find a teacher that could teach me how to meditate, because after all of my, different spiritual explorations, I was raised Roman Catholic. I briefly explored and studied Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, both of which are beautiful religions in which I still believe in very much. But really specifically, Buddhism is focused on meditation and training the mind to basically see the world with loving kindness and compassion, which for me encompassed all the different religions that I had explored. And I met my teacher, my root teacher, Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche, in 2010 through my business partner and first investor, Brandon, who would become my husband. It worked out quite well.
Good thing you got into Buddhism. Jeez.
I know, right? But it's so funny. Brandon and I, we had met as potential business partners. And one of the first conversations that we had was, what do you do for fun? And he was like, well, I meditate. And I was like, wow, that's what I want to do. And it was all very platonic, in this initial conversation. And he loved the idea of M&C Consulting and the technologies that I wanted to build. And we became business partners. He invested in my companies. Shortly thereafter, he had mentioned, that one of his teachers was going to be visiting. I met this teacher again, Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche, and the rest is history. Like, he happened to be Buddhist. I didn't really know much about Buddhism other than the world religions I had studied in university and in high school. I was not very honestly, I was not interested at that time in this teacher because he was Buddhist. It was because of who he was and what he believed meditation meant, which again was about training the mind to see the world with more loving kindness and compassion. And for me, that was it. I was like, okay, yes, this is what I want, right? Like he could have been from any religion, honestly. Like it really wasn't about Buddhism. Again, I didn't really know much about it. It was really that teacher. And then over time, I realized, wow, Buddhism really, this is like good for me. Something I believe in. It's something that reflects my values. And it took like 5 or 6 years before I even self-associated as Buddhist. And now I do. It's a lifestyle choice. It's a spiritual choice. It's something that's really beautiful for me and I believe is beneficial to myself and to those around me. So I'm now in Nepal, finishing up this world tour of 13 different cities that I started on January 9th, and combination of fundraising for one of my companies, MC3, which is our new US Seattle-based company, doing business development for M&C Consulting around the world. And then I'm here in Nepal visiting holy sites, like you mentioned, Joe. And so for me, it's a really beautiful top off to this year, and it started out really well so far.
That's awesome. And you mentioned your husband, Brandon. I found an old tweet that he had sent out that he said, "I'm usually a private person, but I like to publicly celebrate my wife for inspiring me every day and helping make the world a better place with her compassion and leadership." What's it like to have that person who understands you fully, not just on a personal level, but on a professional level as well?
It's amazing, and it's such a gift. Like I'm so grateful for Brandon and our relationship. We actually celebrate our 11th year anniversary next weekend, and he's back in Canada now. But we started as business partners, and he later so he actually works for the Canadian government in our Department of Foreign Affairs called Global Affairs. At the time, he was the director of innovation, and he created the Department of Innovation at Global Affairs. And so he was very, very like leading edge and technically savvy at a time when not a lot of people were within the Canadian government. And that pattern of us supporting each other professionally has been consistent throughout our relationship. In 2015, he was appointed Canada's ambassador to Silicon Valley in Hawaii. And so we very fortunately packed our bags and flew off to San Francisco, lived there for a few years with NAFTA. The Prime Minister moved us to Seattle. We then lived in Seattle for the last 4 years. And so I've also had the great honor and privilege of representing Canada with him, and having the ability to run my companies from these great American cities, while also proudly representing my country, has been such a great honor and privilege. This has all been possible because Brandon and I have just been supporting each other professionally, personally in our lives, and really helping each other to bring out the best in one another and to always strive for the highest possible version of ourselves. And so I wish it for everyone, like whatever it is that you wish for your life, whatever it is that you're hoping to do, I wish that people will find someone who will match that in you, whatever it is you want to be, whatever it is you want to do, but to find that person that can help you achieve your goals and that you can help them achieve their goals, I think is magical. And that's also going to be part of my book.
Her name is Giovanna Mingarelli. Her book, Operation Good Fortune, Demystifying Wealth and Building a Meaningful Life, will drop in 2023. But until then, Giovanna, I'm sure you're going to keep yourself pretty busy traveling and making the world a better place. Thank you very much for carving out some time during your holy trip. I feel like I'm intruding somehow, but thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. This has been amazing, and I look forward to reconnecting soon.
Absolutely. And that is it for this edition of the Forbes Books Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you take a quick second to subscribe so you automatically get new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I'd love if you left us a review so more amazing entrepreneurs like yourself can discover the show. And please don't forget the golden rule and treat others as you want to be treated. Thanks for listening. Until next time, adios.